So ethics is built on a foundation of compliance. You need to know what the rules are, what the bedrock is. But then it's a question of what's in the best interest of the company, of the mission, of my core values, of the company's core values, of the people that I interact with, of the coworkers, the clients, the customers. It's that way of thinking. It's a mindset. You can't get a mindset into regulations and boxes that need to be checked.
Yonason, thank you for taking the time.
It is a pleasure, Raj.
I really appreciate it. You are one of the most interesting characters I've ever read about. World traveler, columnist, TEDx presenter, business advisor, keynote speaker, former hitchhiker. Today, you're the author of 7 books. You've been named to the Thinkers 360 list of top 50 global thought leaders. You're a keynote speaker for a variety of associations, a weekly columnist for Fast Company magazine, award-winning podcast host, and 2 podcasts, correct?
I'm not currently, but
okay,
one's in hiatus.
Sure. You've also been cited in the Washington Post, Forbes, and Newsweek as an authority on ethics, leadership, and culture. I'm sure I've missed something there, but just a phenomenal story. I'm excited to kind of dig into your personal story as well as some of the things you focus on today. And personally, I've never come across someone who is an expert or an authority on ethics, particularly in the business world. It's something that I don't see very often. So did I miss anything there?
Actually, I think you probably said too much. In Judaism, we say that you should never say more than half a person's praise, and I think maybe you overshot the target. But we're all good here.
Well, I'm learning, and I hope to learn a lot more in our conversation. So thank you for that. If we can, I'd love to start with just kind of where you grew up, how you grew up, and some of the experiences you had earlier on in life that might have led to the person you are today.
Sure. I grew up in Los Angeles, California, but don't hold it against me. I never felt at home there. The West Coast is a beautiful, beautiful place. People are very, very nice, but I'm always looking to go deeper. And I just didn't find the culture was one that really I was aligned with in that sense. So I left home the summer before my freshman year in college, just because I wanted a different environment. And then I went up to Northern California, which is not only a different part of the state, but a different part of the planet. It's a completely different culture from Southern California. A lot of agriculture there. It was the University of California in Davis, where I went. It was at the time not nearly as, what's a nice way of putting it, focused on a sort of progressive angle. It was a very diverse place, diverse thinking. And I studied English literature, which I loved because I love language, I love stories, and I love the meanings that are communicated through story. And I was in my element. I just blossomed. I worked as a peer counselor, which helped me understand people better. I read great writers and thinkers. But when I got towards the end of my college career, the real world started to assert itself. What do you do with a degree in English? I really had wanted to be an English professor. What I didn't realize at the time, and really not for decades later, is that I have a very mild learning disability. It was never anything that really hung me up, except I was a slow reader. So when I was in my early parts of my English studies, I had a lot of trouble keeping up with the reading. Once we got into the upper division stuff and it was depth and analysis, I was fine. But I never put 2 and 2 together. And when I took the graduate record exam, my final scores would have equipped me well to go to engineering school, but not really to pursue a career in English. Just I didn't work with the standardized testing. So I was thinking, what could I do that could really open up my vistas? I always felt like I'd grown up in a very comfortable, we weren't upper class by any means, but, sort of upper middle class, normal, suburban. My father was a businessman. And I felt life was really comfortable, really predictable. And I needed to do something that would sort of break me out of that sort of complacency. So I did something rather unconventional. I strapped on a backpack and set off hitchhiking across the United States.
So I've got to ask you, coming from a background that was, like you said, kind of comfortable, how was that perceived by your family when you said you were going to hitchhike?
The way you might expect it to be. My parents were incredulous and not at all encouraging. But I was determined that this was something I needed to do for myself. My parents even offered to buy me a car as a graduation present. And I said, it's really nice. Why did I want to go hitchhiking? Because it meant putting myself in a situation of the unpredictable every day and having to deal with that, never knowing, will I get a ride? When will I get a ride? Who's going to offer me a ride? Where am I going to end up? What am I going to do for sleep? Where am I going to find food? A car, it's your little environment. And it would have been very easy to withdraw into that and not really have the kinds of engagements that I did. But just that, the patience it takes to stand by the roadside, sometimes in bad weather, sometimes for hours, sometimes not getting a ride, and be able to deal with that, to get into a car with somebody and recognize that I'm not really getting a free ride. I'm expected to pay for my ride in a currency other than money, which was usually listening. The strangers on a train principle. I had more than once drivers tell me, I'm telling you things I've never told anybody. Not my wife, not my best friend, not my kids, not my parents. They wanted to unburden themselves. And they wanted to be able to talk to someone that they didn't have any worries that it was going to come back and haunt them or bite them later. And so I found that when I wasn't looking to respond, Stephen Covey says, most people don't listen with the intent to hear or understand. They listen with the intent to reply. And I recognized that was not my place. My place was to let them talk because that's what they wanted to do. And I found when I wasn't spending so much mental activity framing my own responses, I listened much more closely. And I learned much more about them and from them. And that's a lesson that I think is universal. The ability to listen, to be present, to let people know they're being heard. I mean, what do so many people say? You're not hearing me. You're not listening to me. I don't feel heard. I don't feel understood. Leaders need to recognize the importance of listening to their people. Their higher ups, their lower downs. It doesn't matter. To have that sense, they say about the former CEO of Southwest, that he would work in every single job in the airline. Apparently he had a big fishbowl on his desk with all the jobs in it. He'd pick one out once a week, I guess, and he would go do that job. And this is how you learn what's going on in your own organization. You talk to the people, you listen to them, you hear what's on their minds, what are they happy with, what are they unhappy with, what do they want out of their jobs, what are they feeling, what are they thinking. So that the hitchhiking was really something that was, in many ways, foundational to the worldview that I developed from that point forward.
And it wasn't the hitchhiking period of your life when you were the world traveler, correct? Those were two separate periods?
Correct. That was, I took time off during my college career to travel. And then after the hitchhiking, I went to Europe. I backpacked through Europe. And I was actually on my way. I wanted to go around the world again, this time to Africa and Asia and Australia. But when I got to Israel, that's where my plans took an unexpected turn.
And when you were in Israel, that's when you really became connected to your roots in your religion, correct?
Yeah, like many Jews, I knew I was Jewish. I had a sense that it was important, but I couldn't tell you why. I just never made the effort to learn about my own heritage. We didn't observe the festivals or the rituals. I didn't study it. And I sort of had this inkling that I should, but there's just too many other things that distracted me. I didn't have the intellectual discipline as a very young person to seek out what that really meant. And so it really was an unlikely series of events. I got to Israel. I was planning on having a classical Jewish experience of working on a kibbutz, a collective farm. But that summer, the US dollar was at an all-time high. And there were over 8 million Americans in Europe. And when it got cold, a lot of them headed south. They crossed the Mediterranean, they went to Israel, and they all had the same idea, go into the kibbutz, because that's what young people do. You volunteer, you pick oranges or grapefruits, you get free room and board, you work. And I figured I was burnt out on traveling anyway. Every day looking for a new place to sleep, a new place to eat. What am I going to do? Where am I going to go? Schlepping everything I have with me. I just wanted a routine. And I got to Israel, I think it was November or December of '84. And I found the kibbutz placement office, and there were signs up saying, no places for volunteers, come back next year. And there were people camped out in sleeping bags. It was, like they wanted to buy tickets for a Rolling Stones concert. I'm dating myself. So what am I going to do? I don't have money to just hang out. I don't want to hang out. I want routine. I want structure. I want something that's going to sort of get my mind back focused. And I remembered I had once heard that there were schools, there were seminaries where you could study the fundamentals of Judaism. And I went looking and I found one. And I really didn't have any expectations. I just wanted something to do and something to occupy my mind and a routine and not have to look for a place to sleep every night. And so the seminary gave me a bed and it gave me 3 square meals and it gave me routine. So it was what I was looking for, but it was much more than I expected.
Would you say that experience was what kind of laid the groundwork for the work you do today?
Oh, no doubt about it. For a couple of reasons. One, my first day there, I was brought into a class, like an introduction. And we talked about some laws. You could actually translate them into business laws, loans and sales and damages. The cases may seem arcane. This guy's ox scores that guy's ox. But really, it's not that much different from if my car runs into yours. It's the same underlying principles. It's highly relevant. It's kind of interesting and nothing tremendously inspirational there. Just getting familiar with the type of thinking that goes into this sort of study. And then immediately after, there was a class in philosophy. Well, I loved philosophy in college, so I was looking forward to it. It was winter, and it was cold, and it had been drizzling outside. It was kind of damp and chilly. And there was one ray of sunlight coming into the room in the far back corner, literally the farthest back seat was the one place where there was a ray of sunlight. So I went and I sat there, and the whole room filled up around me, filled and overfilled. There was barely a square inch of space. And the instructor walked in, and everybody stood up. And I looked for a way out, because this instructor was not just a rabbi, he was Hasidic, with the big hat and the long coat and the side locks and the scraggly beard and the glasses with Coke bottle lenses. And I was sure. He's going to have a thick Yiddish accent. He's going to say, "You better do what I say or you're going to burn in hell." That's what I was expecting. And I literally would have done anything to get out of that room, except I couldn't, because it was packed. And I would have had to literally climb over a dozen people to get out. It wasn't going to happen. So I sort of slid back in my chair, and I thought, okay, I can survive anything for an hour. And then he started to speak. Well, I found out later he was actually a professor of philosophy from Johns Hopkins University. So his accent wasn't Yiddish, it was New England. And he was so articulate. He understood. I mean, he was a step ahead of me on every point. And he was so rational. I couldn't reconcile. How could somebody who looks like this sound like this? And that was also a turning point for me, because we are so locked into our preconceptions, our stereotypes, our biases, conscious and unconscious. I was 100% sure I knew who this person was, and I was dead wrong. And that realization opened me up to a whole different way of thinking. Well, from that point forward, I thought, well, there's something significant here. I wasn't thinking that I was going to change my life, but I was thinking that, if I'm intellectually honest, I was just traveling, I was just seeing different cultures. I saw myself as a seeker of truth. Well, if I'm a seeker of truth, I kind of have to give this a chance just to hear what it is before I go on with my travels. Well, I thought maybe a couple of months would do it. But the more I stayed and the more I listened, the more I engaged, the more I discovered this is really unlike anything I had studied before. It's profound, it's practical, there's a wisdom here, and there's an internal truth to it that I couldn't help but acknowledge. And eventually, I ran out of excuses not to stay, and that really changed the whole trajectory of my life. I spent the next 9 years in Israel. I met my wife there. We had our first 2 children there. I studied. I eventually got my rabbinic ordination. And I taught Jewish high school for 23 years. And when I retired from the classroom, and I was thinking about what I wanted to do, I love teaching, I love speaking, I love storytelling. And maybe I can take the universal values of Judaism and make them relevant for a general audience and for professionals. And when I tried to think about how to distill the essence of Jewish teachings into a single concept, that's when I came up with ethics. Because ultimately everything in our culture, in our practice, in our philosophy, in our way of life, it's focused on ethics. Not just what we have to do, but what we ought to do, and being responsible for our own choices. And that's something that is going to make any culture successful if it becomes the bedrock of that culture.
I've previously heard you say, I think it was on a podcast, that ethics, and I'm paraphrasing here, you can put up kind of guardrails in an organization or a culture to have people act ethically, but it can't be entirely based on sort of those guardrails, because then people can check the boxes and say that, they checked all the boxes, even if they do something that could be viewed as unethical. So in your opinion, what would the qualities of ethical leadership or decision-making look like? And are those qualities what someone should try to follow or emulate if they want to be ethical?
Yeah, so you actually made 3 points there that we'll take one by one.
Sure.
The first is those guardrails, we call them compliance. And the line that I frequently use is that compliance can often be the enemy of ethics for the reasons that you said. And if I check the boxes and I'm in compliance, then I could say I'm now exempt from any responsibility for my decisions after that. And that's a mindset that's dangerous, because there are always going to be loopholes. And there are always going to be ways they call it, the science fiction writer Robert Heinlein called it a white mutiny, where you followed the rules and the instructions so carefully that you completely distort the intent behind them. Now they call that malicious compliance, right? To do things that are actually contrary to what the laws and the rules and the regulations are trying to achieve. So ethics is built on a foundation of compliance. You need to know what the rules are, what the bedrock is. But then it's a question of what's in the best interest of the company, of the mission, of my core values, of the company's core values, of the people that I interact with, of the coworkers, the clients, the customers. It's that way of thinking. It's a mindset, and you can't get a mindset into regulations and boxes that need to be checked. So that's the starting point. Now you asked two questions. You asked about the qualities of an ethical leader, and when you asked about the process of making ethical decisions. So those are actually two components of my ethics presentations. So let's look first at the qualities of an ethical leader. And I use an acronym, and you could probably guess what it is: ethics. Right? And it comes down to, very briefly, empathy, which is the ability to intuit what other people are feeling, what state of mind they're in, what they want, what they don't want, how they're going to respond. There's trustworthiness, which means that I am honest, I'm transparent, but I'm also willing to trust others. Because if I'm not willing to trust you, why should you trust me? And if I'm not willing to trust you, then basically I'm a micromanager, or I'm restricting you to the point where you just fall back on those compliance laws. And I'm not taking any initiative here. I'm not risking anything. I'm going to do exactly what I'm told. And if it doesn't work out, it's not my problem. The H is humility, because leaders need to surround themselves with people who will challenge them, who will ask questions. There's a cartoon I saw in the New Yorker, I think, years ago, where the CEO says to his assistant, "I hate yes men. Don't you agree, Perkins?" And you see it in politics, you see it in government, you see it in business. I only want to hear what I want to hear. And why would I want to do that? Why wouldn't I want someone who's going to perhaps see a flaw in my plan or in my reasoning, who's going to see a better way of doing something, see something, a way we could spin this off, we can develop it this way. All of us are smarter than any of us. And having that humility, the line I like to use from Pastor Rick Warren is, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less.
That's an amazing quote.
Yeah, it really sums it up. And it's that willingness to share power when that's what's in the best interest of the mission and the organization. Then the I is inquisitiveness. I always have to ask questions. I always have to try to learn. Right? We never know enough, right? If I want to look like I know it all, that means I don't know enough. And the C is courage, because even when we recognize that something might be the right way of going, might be the right idea, but it might be hard, because we have to go back and reevaluate. We have to change the way we're doing things. We have to change the way we're looking at things. Right? So to have the courage to admit I've been wrong up until this point, or we need to shift course. And then finally, the S is self-discipline. For exactly the same reason, it's not about checking boxes. Even with character traits, it's about always looking to improve every one of those areas. And a leader who works on developing these 6 elements, these 6 qualities, these 6 aspects of character is almost inevitably going to be respected, admired. He's going to earn loyalty and commitment. He's going to be an inspiration. He's going to motivate his or her people to want to do their very best because they feel they're part of something greater than themselves.
I think some of it most people have, but if you wanted to develop these characteristics, how can you even start?
Well, probably go on YouTube.
Great point.
Go to the self-improvement section of the. They still have bookstores. I don't know. But really, it's wisdom. What's the difference between knowledge and wisdom? Knowledge is information. And I could memorize Encyclopedia Britannica if I were able to. Would not add one iota to my wisdom unless I can take all that knowledge, all that data, all that information, and apply it in a way that is meaningful and beneficial. So wisdom is now we use this term growth mindset. Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, popularized it. But this has been part of Jewish teachings for over 3,000 years. The idea of always looking to do better. Wherever I am, right? It doesn't matter where I am on the ladder. It depends which way I'm going. So one way that's very easy is to recognize people that have these qualities and spend time with them, either literally in the room with them or consuming their content. There's so many wise people in the media. There are a lot more not wise people in the media. So you have to be selective. But if you really want to improve, go find the people who are doing it well and learn from them. Read their books, listen to their podcasts, listen to their speeches, talk to them if you can. Find people. Jim Rohn says you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And it's a simple and brilliant observation. And if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room because you're not learning, you're not growing, you're not changing. So, even the movies we watch. My 6-year-old granddaughter is visiting us now, which is a whole different aspect of our lives. But and so last night she was watching one of these animated movies, and I was sitting there with her, and I tried asking her questions. How do you think that made this person feel? Just ask ourselves that question. Be inspired. There are inspiring people in the world, and we just have to give ourselves access to it.
Thank you for sharing that. You made a really interesting point regarding growth mindset, that being something that existed for thousands of years. And the way you put it was, it doesn't matter where you are on the ladder, it's the direction you're going in. So one thing that I find fascinating is successful cultures, cultures that are able to succeed emotionally, financially, whatever the case is. Jewish people as a whole, generally speaking, I view as a successful people or culture. Would you say it's those types of teachings that are instilled in younger generations, the need for constant improvement and getting better, that are partly leading to that type of success?
Absolutely. We call ourselves the people of the book. And that's because we have a tradition that goes back to the beginning of our own existence. And it is filled with moral teachings, and they're complicated. And when you read the stories of the Bible, they're not about perfect people walking around getting everything right. More of them are about people falling short and people making mistakes. And first of all, where do you find that in ancient culture, that the records about leaders are often uncomplimentary? He did this perfectly, he did this, he built this, and he did that, right? He won this war, and then all of a sudden it goes silent. Why? Because things weren't going well. They don't put any of that in the history. We do the opposite. We focus on the failures because you learn so much more. Why did this go wrong? Why did King Solomon cause his kingdom to be divided? Why did King David, make decisions in his life that proved catastrophic? And understanding that these were great people, so we have to understand their mistakes in a more nuanced way. And that's challenging, to be able to see different angles. And that really goes back to ethics as well, right? Until you see the whole picture, you really don't understand any of what you're seeing. Because the last piece, they make movies like this sometimes, where they withhold one piece of information, that when it gets to the very end and they give you that piece of information, you go, oh, and now I understand all these things that were going on that didn't really make sense in isolation. This is the way the Torah is constructed, so that we are forced to dig beneath the surface. And we live a life where, tonight, right, we're recording this on a Friday. This evening is our Sabbath. And the whole world changes for us on the Sabbath. We don't use any technology, which is why we have to live in walking distance to our place of worship, which means that we have neighbors who share our values, and we become friends with them, and our kids play together, and we go to the same events and the same schools and the same houses of worship. And that structural integrity of community helps hold us together with the value on study and on character development and on meticulous observance of the laws. All of these elements come together. It's still a challenge because human beings don't stop being human beings just because we're committed to a religion or an ideal. We still have our self-interest, we still have our egos, we still have our desires, and that doesn't go away. But the discipline gives us a way of managing those if we take advantage of it. But it's a constant struggle. I'm not sure I want to go back and parent my kids all over again because I'm not sure I'd do better if I had to do it again. But, there's so many things I look back and I say, gosh, if only I would have known then what I know now, maybe I would have, not been so strict on this or been more conscientious about that or been more aware and more engaged. But we're human beings. And life is a process of self-development. We're not expected to get it perfect. We're expected to do the best we can and take responsibility for ourselves when we don't do what we're supposed to so we can do better in the future. And again, take that concept, put it into a business, put it into an organization. I don't walk past a piece of trash on the ground because it's the janitor's job to pick it up. I pick it up because this is my place. This is my business. I want it to be nice. I want to make a good impression. I want to be in a place that feels like people are responsible for every element.
One of our core values at our company is embodying an ownership mindset. And the example we always use is picking up trash. If a team member is visiting one of our communities and you walk by a piece of trash, then you're not embodying an ownership mindset. So I think it's very interesting that a lot of the core values that you can try to implement in a company or a company culture are universal.
Yeah.
They really are. You have a gift of being able to kind of distill this ancient wisdom into modern language. What are some of the other ancient teachings that you try to bring into modern companies or try to teach?
Let's see, you mentioned earlier ethical decision making. So I have a part of my program called the 4 Muses of Ethical Decision Making. And I always introduce it by saying that this is not going to be a talk about religion or Bible history. It's going to be a talk about character and leadership and personal greatness. And I'm going to tell you 4 stories that you already know and bring out the lessons that are relevant to all of us. So I start with Abraham. Right? Abraham lived in a world where everyone was pagan. They worshiped the gods of the powers of nature. And those were their gods, the god of the sun and the god of the wind and the god of the rain and the trees and the earth. And Abraham, as a very young person, he asked a question. He said, if there are all these different gods, and they're all responsible for different elements of the world, why does the world seem to work in a consistent, interconnected way? Now, he didn't know the answer, but just by asking the question, he was calling into question something that everybody believed. Idols back then were like cell phones today. Everybody had them, and there are probably other comparisons you could make there too. Right? But because Abraham was willing to ask a question, he opened up his own mind to an answer that nobody else was thinking about. Because if you have an organized system, doesn't there have to be somebody outside the system who put that system in place? Systems don't get into order by themselves. And he created the belief of monotheism. Now, it put him at odds with the whole world. In fact, he was the first person called the Hebrew, and the word Hebrew means the one on the other side. So yes, he came across from the other side of the Jordan River into Mesopotamia, but he was also on one side philosophically and ideologically, and the whole world was on the other side. But he didn't let that dissuade him. And today, Jews and Christians and Muslims make up half the population of the world. 3 billion people are practicing Abrahamic monotheism. Go point to somebody on TikTok or Instagram who has that level of influence. So the first point is curiosity. We mentioned it before as a character trait. And we're talking about it as a strategy to ask questions, to investigate, to look beneath the surface. Then the next step is Adam. Because when God creates Adam, Here, I always like to pose this as a trivia question, right? What's the first example? What's the first advice in history for CEOs?
The first advice in history for CEOs. I've got to be honest with you. I don't have an answer there, and I'm going to show humility and just say I don't have an answer.
That's okay. Most people don't get it. But it's when God says, "Let us make man in our image." Who's he talking to? Presumably his heavenly court, his angels. But he created them. He doesn't need their advice. He's God. He knows everything. He can do everything. But it's a lesson for us that when you're a CEO, right, God's CEO of the universe, right, include your people in the conversation. Ask their advice. Let them feel that they're playing a role. Let them be part of the process so there's transparency. And if you're not God, and most of us aren't, maybe somebody's going to see something you don't know. It ties right into that idea of humility. Right? So that the next element is consultation. Right? First, curiosity is gathering information. Consultation is applying that so that we go from knowledge to wisdom. And then by doing that, we get to the next phase, which is the story of Noah and the ark. Right? And in that case, Noah was told by God there's going to be a flood and to destroy the world. Why? Because human beings have become so violent that they're on the brink of self-destruction. So if God doesn't intervene, human beings wipe themselves out of existence, no more people. Right? And that's anticipating outcomes. Always looking ahead. Don't wait for the future to arrive. Look into the future, see where things are headed, make course adjustments if you need to so that you can arrive at a better future. You need that clarity. That's the third element. The ability to project, to look ahead, to see where things are going, achieve clarity, and that will show you the course that you need to take. And then the fourth element, and final, is we learn from David and Goliath, courage. Right? David wasn't a warrior. He wasn't a soldier. He was a shepherd. And his father sent him out to the battlefront to bring a care package to his brothers who were in King Saul's army. And he sees this giant there is taunting the Jewish soldiers, saying, "Send out your best man, we'll settle this. We don't have to spill blood on the field." And nobody's going out. Everybody's terrified. Everybody's intimidated. And David says, if nobody else is going to do it, I guess I have to. Right? Because in a place where there are no leaders, the sages say, strive to be a leader. If no one else is going to take that job, is going to do that job, it becomes my obligation to do it because it needs to get done. And even if it's not my job description, even if I haven't done it before, even if I don't know if I can, there is no telling what we can accomplish until we're put in the situation that pulls out our true potential. Shakespeare says, right, some are born to greatness, some choose greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. And that willingness to put myself in a situation that's uncomfortable, that's challenging, that's difficult, where I might fail, but it needs to be done, that's the final element.
And just going back to the analogy of moving up the ladder in the right direction, I feel like if that's your mindset and that's what you're looking to do, you're going to be uncomfortable very regularly.
All the gurus tell us, get out of your comfort zone. Why don't we do it? Because it's uncomfortable.
Sure.
Yeah, hello. Right? You want to, what do you do before you work out? You stretch. Right? What do you do when you go to the gym and it gets easy with the 20-pound weights? You move to the 25-pound weights. When it's easy on the treadmill, you turn up the resistance. We understand this in physical fitness. Right? We even understand it in skill development. But somehow in life and in business, it's harder for us to apply those lessons in a way that's going to make a meaningful, positive difference in the work we do.
That makes a lot of sense. You've also mentioned previously, I think it was on a podcast as well, relationships, ethics being the foundation of relationships. And in the business world, particularly in the US, I can't speak for other countries, but in the US, a lot of what we do in the business world is based on relationships and trust. Is that another core focus of yours, just the ethics and the relationship piece when you do your speaking?
Yeah, I mean, everything's relationships. I mean, employees and boss, co-workers, business people and clients and customers, it's all about, I mean, we all know this. What do they say now? You need, I don't even know what it's up to now, 10, 15, 20 touches before. I just got a LinkedIn connection request today or yesterday. And the guy goes right into his sales pitch. And I haven't accepted at this point. I don't know if I will, because tell me something we have in common. Tell me something that makes me want to have a relationship with you. And then you can tell me what services you have to offer. But you jump right in, hi, I want to talk to you because I want to offer you this. That's not a relationship. It's so obvious, but we're so impatient. We don't want to. Relationships are work. I mean, anybody who's married knows this. Been married. Anybody who's had children knows this. Anybody who's had parents knows this. Relationships are hard. And what makes them work well is when there's trust. I know you have my best interest at heart. I know you want to be fair. I know there's a reason for the things that you do. Okay, I don't happen to agree with what you're doing right now. I don't happen to like what you're doing right now, but there's a foundation there. And I can believe that even though I'm not happy with your choice at the moment, there's enough history that I'm not going to discard you or discredit you because right now we're having a disagreement.
One of the common threads I'm seeing here is a lot of what you teach, and I think the way you think is it's very long term. Relationships, like you said, you cannot build overnight. A lot of the teachings regarding ethics, it's your actions day in, day out to build the relationships or to build the foundation for your company for success over the long term. Are there steps that companies or leaders can take immediately to implement some of your teachings?
Yeah, I think one of the most important places to start is by articulating their core values and their mission. Your mission can't just be make money. Yeah, we want to make money, definitely. Right? But we'll make more money if we have some other purpose, if we have some other mission. It's not just, and this is where so many businesses get in trouble, especially public companies, because they're so focused on short-term indicators, right, that they will short-circuit long-term success. Because if you embark on a project that if it's going to take 5 years, but once you complete it, you're going to skyrocket. Oh, but wait a minute. You haven't produced anything this quarter. You haven't produced anything next quarter. How can you call yourself a success? Okay, so we'll start focusing on the short term at the expense of the long term. We're never going to get there. So that sense of mission and purpose is critical. And then the other element is knowing your core values. And that's something people talk about, but I don't know how many people can actually articulate, individuals or companies. I was part of an association, and we wanted to define our core values. So we had probably 3 or 4 meetings, hour-long meetings, over the course of 4 months, I think. And we started with brainstorming. Anything that might be of value, write it down. And then we spent time individually and then afterwards collectively organizing those values into groupings. Because you really shouldn't have more than 5 core values. 3 is probably better. And then we started prioritizing within those groups, right? Consolidating. Well, this really includes that, so we can take that out of the list. And we ended up with a list of 5. And then we had a description that incorporated some of the secondary values. But it gave us a reference point any time you have to make decisions. And you're struggling because important decisions are often difficult. You may have competing priorities. You might have competing values. You can't accomplish everything at once, right? There's going to be a short-term investment for a long-term gain. And all of these factors, they're complicated, and you can't predict the future. So there are people's egos and feelings are in play. So you can always look back and say, is this decision that we're proposing consistent with our core values? If it is, go forward. If it's not, go back, take another look.
There's the decision making based on core values, and then hiring based on core values as well, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
One thing that we've done as a company over the last year and a half is really formulate those core values as a team and then try our best to live by them and make decisions by them. But prior to the last year and a half or 2 years, our core values were simply just something on our website. How many companies do you come across, like, if you can just throw a percentage out there, where they're not truly making that a focus?
I can't give you a number, but I would say a majority.
Sure.
And perhaps a significant majority. You hear stories and you see, there are three companies that I mention frequently. One is Trader Joe's. You walk into Trader Joe's, everybody's happy. People love working there. Talk to the people while you're checking out. You like your job? I love my job. Why do they love working at Trader Joe's and they don't love working at Target? Or they don't like working at Kroger, right? It's all about culture. Whoever's responsible for the culture at Trader Joe's is doing a darn good job. And you can tell just by walking in. You enjoy shopping there. It's a pleasant experience. Everybody's helpful. Everybody's friendly. Everybody's happy. That's culture, right? Southwest Airlines, the only American carrier to have never had an unprofitable quarter. Somebody told me they had one recently, but I haven't verified that. You get on a Southwest plane, and most of the time, the announcements are sprinkled with humor and individual personality. They encourage this. And people respond to it. Okay, I got to listen to the same old boring announcements that I've heard so many times. Oh, this guy's throwing in jokes, and this woman's making clever little comments. It makes it fun. It's enjoyable. And it brings the whole plane, creates a kind of camaraderie. And the other one is Zappos, a shoe store, where they have this bizarre, frankly, bizarre business model where they encourage their callers to talk to people as long as people want to talk. It's almost like a free therapy line. You call in to buy shoes, and you could end up, I think they keep records. I forget what the longest one is. Like it's over an hour that a person spoke to a customer. And they get penalized for this. It's encouraged. It's a culture that is, it's a business all about culture. And from what I read, when you go through the training there, if you make it all the way through, they say, okay, we're willing to hire you, or we'll pay you $2,000 not to work for us. But if you take it, you can never work for us again. And a very small percentage take it. And that's accomplishing two things. One, it's weeding out people that really aren't committed to the culture. But it's also implanting in people. I gave up $2,000 to work here. I want this to work out.
I like that a lot. I think we're going to steal that idea. and I also, well, question for you there. Is that unethical?
Oh, no, I don't think. I wouldn't call it stealing. I'd say borrowing or adopting.
Sure.
There's nothing wrong with sharing good ideas and using other people's wisdom. There's no monopoly on something like that. It makes the world better. The more people who are engaged in work that they feel is meaningful and they trust their employers and they feel that their contributions are valued, right, they are going to be happier, more productive people. And that means when they go home from work, they're going to be better husbands and better wives and better parents and better children and better neighbors and better friends and better community members. You go through work and you hate your job. The minute you get out that door, one, you're relieved to be out of there. And two, you are ready to bite the head off of anybody who gives you anything, any kind of, I took it at work, I'm not taking it from you. This is how a culture, and I don't just mean a business culture, I mean a whole society rises when we all feel that we matter, that we're doing something useful with our time, and that we're fairly treated. Ethics it makes the world go around, or not.
A lot of it is really just going back to basics and fundamentals.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's why your message and the way you're able to take ancient teachings and bring them to the modern world really resonates. Because the more I hear you speak on this, it's like, okay, this is stuff that should almost be natural to us as humans.
Well, it's one of the comments I get from time to time, which is, everything you're saying makes so much sense. Why don't people get it? And it goes back to being humans. We have our egos. We have our desires. We want things fast. We want things easy. Our brains are lazy. We want to take shortcuts if we could find them. I do too. I mean, I told you I've got a very mild reading disability, but it used to be that reading was about the only way you could really engage your mind on an intellectual level. Now, it's so much easier to listen to podcasts and watch YouTubes and interviews. It takes a lot of discipline for me and for many of us to actually read something substantive. If I'm reading, I can read a spy novel, which is one of my guilty pleasures, or I can sit down and actually read something that has serious content to it. I mean, these are all the little decisions we make day by day. And yes, we need time to relax. We need time, even if you're on a diet, you need dessert once in a while. You go to the gym every day. Okay, sometimes you have a cookie, piece of chocolate. We're not trying to turn ourselves into, Arnold Schwarzenegger's. And I heard the story about Jim Palmer. I think it was Jim Palmer, maybe not. One of the great baseball pitchers. He said he was never not preparing. He said, if I was at a party and I saw chocolate chip cookies and I saw cottage cheese, yeah, the chocolate chip cookies look good, but they're not going to get me where I want to be. So I'd eat the cottage cheese, and because I knew it was getting me where I wanted to go, I enjoyed it more than I would have enjoyed the chocolate chip cookies. Now, granted, most of us are not going to have that level of focus, but we can aspire to something more than that. I really want to lose 15 pounds. How much? How much do I want to lose it? Right? Enough to have one cookie instead of two, in order to spend another 10 minutes at the gym rather than leave early. Right? It's all those little decisions. That's the self-discipline element that we made. It spreads throughout every aspect of our lives. If I'm disciplined in one area, that's going to position me to be more disciplined in a different area. And that means that all of these elements are going to come together in a way that produces more consistent success.
Thank you for sharing that. And for me, that point really hit home of, how badly do I want it, especially when it comes to eating habits, because I've been the person to yo-yo diet or, gain a bunch of weight, lose a bunch of weight. And this most recent episode of losing weight, it's been more about balance of, how badly do I really want to lose X number of pounds? But that's a question I'm going to ask myself when I see the cottage cheese and the cookie. Which one's going to take me to my goal, and also how badly do I want to reach that goal?
Yeah, sometimes you may need the cookie. It's okay to give ourselves a little bit of grace.
Right.
I had a friend in college. Haven't seen her in decades, but she was a big. So call her a girl. Is still allowed? That's what we called young females back then. She was about 5'10" probably, and she was a little on the heavy side. And I knew her for several years, and I still remember the last time I saw her. We got together for coffee. And I said, gosh, you look great. And she says, you mean I look thin? I said, yeah. She said, thank you. She said, I've been working on this for 3 years. Right? I didn't go on crash diets. I didn't take pills. I just became more disciplined in my habits. And I've lost 15 pounds a year over 3 years. And she looked fabulous. And she felt fabulous without radically changing her lifestyle or feeling deprived or denying herself. As you say, it's just a matter of balance and a measure of discipline.
I would agree. That's the way to do it, slow and gradual. We're approaching the hour mark. So I have a couple questions that I want to throw your way. I hope you don't mind kind of a rapid fire round, if you will. As we were going through the notes, kind of preparing for this episode, the topic of binary thinking, the evil of binary thinking, came up. And I have no clue how to interpret that. So would you mind expanding?
Well, sure. I mean, the title of my sixth book and my podcast is Grappling with the Gray, because it's so much easier if we can reduce every decision to black and white, to yes or no, to right or wrong, to good and evil. Okay, I'll make the decision. But life isn't like that. Most of life's important decisions are in that gray area between what's obviously good and obviously bad. And we have to grapple with that. We have to struggle with it. We talked about it a little bit already, that idea of competing priorities and competing values and collateral damage and balancing short-term investment versus long-term gain. I mean, you can't do it. You can't do it on everything. You know, my wife, I have so much admiration for her. She started her current career relatively late in life. She's a special ed teacher. And she was teaching in an elementary school, and she went to get her certification in special ed. We had 4 little children at home. And she went to night school. They didn't have online courses then. And she got her certification. And then she continued going for her master's, and then continued going for her master's plus 30. Right? Now she's 2 years away from retirement, and she is at the top of the pay scale. If she wouldn't have invested all that time and all that energy, it's time away from me, time away from our children, staying up late, exhausting herself, trying to do her job, doing her job. Right? But different people in different situations, it's not a one-size-fits-all. You can't expect everybody. I had my best friend in college. His family had a small family farm. His father was a seed salesman. His mother was a part-time teacher. And they had this farm they were running spare time. And he was in and out of college. He could never make it through a whole semester because he was needed on the family farm. So what should he do? Should he not help on the farm to advance his college career faster? Should he give up college to help on the family farm? There's no app for that. There's no app for being ethical. We have to make choices, but recognizing that they're complicated, trying to make sure that we have all the information we need, balancing all the different criteria. It's not black and white. It's never going to be. And trying to simplify complicated choices is likely not going to get us where we want to go.
That's a great point. And I can't think of too many scenarios in life that we actually come across, hypothetical, sure, but too many scenarios that we come across on a daily basis where it truly is black and white. There's always a little bit of gray in there.
Sure.
So thank you for sharing. Another question that I have to ask you before we wrap up. You've traveled the world. You've got to experience many different cultures, many different ways of life, and yet you selected a place to call home. How did that decision get made, and why did you call one place home?
Well, the truth is, and I'm going to be a little bit theological, for me and for many Jews, Israel is our home. And I did live in Israel for 9 years. And the reason we didn't stay there is because I never became fluent in the language to the point where I felt I could make the greatest contribution as a teacher, as a community member. We loved it there, and we hope to return there and retire there. But after that, it was pretty much going where Providence led us. We taught for 1 year in Budapest, Hungary. That was interesting and very worthwhile, but wasn't a place where we really felt we wanted to stay. Our kids were starting to get older, and we had to worry about their education and their peer groups. I got a job in Atlanta, Georgia, taught there for 2 years. I was young and zealous and frequently told the principal things he didn't want to hear, so that didn't last. And then I got offered a job in St. Louis, where we are now. And I taught in a wonderful school for 20 years before I retired. And my wife is very secure in her job and at this point kind of counting the days until retirement. She has 2 years left. But sometimes we go where the path takes us. If it doesn't work out, we get back on the path and see what's going to happen next. But I think we can make any place home as long as we have a sense of purpose, as long as we can find a community that's worth being part of. That's why neighborhoods are so important. That's why religious organizations and congregations are so important. There are lots of varieties of, even within the Orthodox Jewish world. In our, St. Louis does not have a huge Orthodox Jewish population. We still have several different synagogues, and they all have their own flavors. And people can find something that may not be a perfect fit because nothing ever is, but it's a close fit. Certainly with Christianity, how many different brands and varieties and styles. You can find something that works for you. And having that feeling, I'm part of something. I have people I can rely on. I have people we share common values. And shared common values doesn't mean that we agree on everything all the time. That's not healthy. There has to be a little bit of constructive disagreement, of civil discourse, of back and forth, because that's also part of growing and being aware and having an ethical culture where we're looking at things from different angles. But home does not depend on geography. It depends on finding a place where I can develop myself and my talents and my potentials and contribute and feel that I'm living a life of value and purpose.
Going back to that concept of home, so the religion my family follows is Sikhism, and we're from a state in northern India, Punjab. So like for me, Punjab is home, even though I didn't grow up there, and I've only been there for like a month of my life. But the U.S., I would say, is my home before Punjab. So just to clarify on the way you view home, Israel is home before anywhere else. Is that correct?
Yeah, which doesn't mean that I don't feel a tremendous connection to the United States and a tremendous gratitude because Jews are able to live in America in a way that we have not been able to live in most places we've been in our history. It is concerning today, with the rise of anti-Semitism again and the fierce rhetoric against Israel and spills over against Jews and the misinformation and disinformation that's out there. And many Jews do feel that things could get precarious, as they have at so many intersections of history. The Jews were welcomed into Spain before the Inquisition and the expulsion. They were welcomed into Poland before the Cossack massacres. They were welcomed into Europe before the Crusades. It's been, it's our history is one of not being settled. And that has a lot to do with our consciousness. Jews who have learned our history know that no matter how comfortable we may be in a place at any given moment, it's not something to take for granted. So again, we are very grateful that that the United States remains a place where we feel relatively welcome and relatively safe, but that can change.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, and I appreciate you sharing. You mentioned, just on this topic of home, you mentioned being within walking distance of a place of worship. There are only maybe a dozen pockets in St. Louis that are walkable. So are you in one of the more urban walkable parts of St. Louis, or are you in suburban St. Louis? Just curious.
We're a university city, which I think is technically suburban, but it's not, it's not way out. It still has a very in the city feel, if not really urban. But I'll just tell you one anecdote. When we moved here from Atlanta, we came in one evening and the moving truck showed up the next morning. And the first thing off the truck were our kids' bicycles, my 5-year-old daughter, my 3-year-old son. And we thought, great, Now they'll have something to keep them occupied while I'm overseeing the moving, and my wife is holding our 3-month-old daughter. Well, my son got on his bike, went around the corner, and immediately we heard screaming. He had fallen over and broken both bones in one arm and dislocated the elbow. So now we have movers, a 5-year-old, a 3-month-old, and a 3-year-old who has to go to the emergency room. My wife was around the corner meeting one of our neighbors. And the neighbor said, "Here, leave your baby with me. Your she'll be okay. You can go in the ambulance with your son, and your husband can watch the movers." Now, this is a woman she had met literally 5 minutes earlier. And what universe does a virtual stranger offer to watch your 3-month-old, and you feel comfortable letting them do that without a second thought? This is the power of community. And it's one of the wonders of the Orthodox Jewish community that wherever we go, there's an instant connection. We know which neighborhoods are options for us, and the people there they're open, they're helpful, they're warm and receptive, and you can have a story like this. That's the kind of community that we want to find in our neighborhoods, in our businesses, and in society at large. I spent a lot of time traveling. Anytime I ran into an American, there's an instant rapport, because now we are a small minority. Not that small, because tourism is everywhere. Especially when I was just out of college. You meet somebody who's college age, there's a rapport, there's a connection. You just sit down and you start talking, right? Because you have that sense of common bond. And that's something we all need more of.
I would agree with that. And I would also say, or just add, that feeling of community is truly priceless. And like you said, something we all need. We like to end the show with what we call a hole-in-one, which is just your greatest piece of advice that you can offer to our listeners, viewers, that maybe they can implement in their life or business today. You've given us so many just words of wisdom, teachings, but is there anything else you have left in the tank that you can share that we can implement almost immediately?
Yeah, I do get this asked from time to time, and I think I'll sort of reiterate something that we already talked about. And we talked about 2 different ideas, and we just put them together. That 1, asking questions, and 2, surrounding yourself with quality people. Let's surround yourself with people who will challenge you to do better, challenge you to think different. They say that as people are living older and older today, there are a lot more cognitive issues, something that's being talked about on the national stage right now. So there's different types of advice. How do we try to keep the brain sharp as we get older? So do crossword puzzles, do Sudoku, drive a different way home from work, learn a language. Do things that your brain is not comfortable with. But one of the best things we can do is to talk to people who think differently from us. And that means talking to them and listening to them to understand. Right? Not debating them, not just listening and nodding, but actually trying to understand it. So if you tell me something, you're wondering, how much have I listened? How much have I heard? If I re-articulate to you what you've said, now you know. Either I got it right and we can move on, or I got it wrong and you can help me see where I got it wrong. But now you know I've listened, you know I've understood, there's a level of trust there. And now if I want to disagree with you, you're going to be much more receptive to me because you know that I understand you, as opposed to just a knee-jerk reaction. No, you said that, you said blue, I said green. I talk about this whenever I can, that 2,000 years ago, there were 2 great schools of study, of Jewish learning, the House of Hillel and the House of Shammai. And history records that when they debated in the study hall, they argued with such passion. It was as if they fought with swords and spears. Right? But they were always friends. It never got personal. They were both looking for truth. And therefore, they wanted to hear what the other one had to say. And it didn't mean that they came to a meeting of minds. They rarely did, because they had different outlooks, and yet they respected each other. They got along. They married their sons and daughters to each other. There was nothing ideological about it. There was no ego involved. It was passionate search for deeper understanding and search for truth. And look for people that you can talk to that don't see the world your way. You'll end up knowing yourself better. And what's the worst thing that might happen? You might discover, maybe I'm wrong. Wouldn't I rather discover I'm wrong so I can start being right than persist in being wrong?
Thank you for sharing that. I think I'm paraphrasing here again, but I think I've heard you say previously, it's better to argue and not come to a decision than to come to a decision without arguing.
Yeah, that's a quote from Jacques Joubert, I think, French philosopher. Yeah.
Okay.
Better to debate a matter without resolving it than resolve it without debating it.
Well, thank you for showing your high level of ethics by attributing that quote to the French philosopher versus yourself. I was giving you the credit, but you were very humble in passing it along. Yonason, thanks for your time. We're going to link your LinkedIn, Substack, and your website in the description. And those are the 3 best ways people can learn more about you and contact you, correct?
Yeah, please reach out. I'm always happy to continue the conversation.
Thanks again. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much.